Okay, listen up, 80s and 90s kids who loved the Neverending Story. If you grew up to be into spirituality and consciousness, then you're gonna wanna hear this. I think this movie is actually about the relationship between the sixth and the third dimension. Hear me out. I was on Gaia TV watching Open Minds with Regina Meredith, and she had Tim, tactical advisor. We all know him. So Tim worked for a secret program in Germany, and he explains that he got a lot of his information from Being Six. Now, Being Six is a collective of beings residing in the sixth level of consciousness, which we're gonna call the sixth dimension for the sake of this video. And they use technology to compress frequency, and this allowed them to speak directly to Being Six. We're gonna tie this into Neverending Story, but just give me a sec. Because as Tim is talking about these beings on the sixth level of consciousness, because they are completely a collective, when opposing forces or negative forces are at play, it actually becomes self-destructive for Being Six because it's a collective. And Tim goes on to say that these beings actually rely on level 3 beings, and for this, we're gonna call that the third dimension. So the sixth dimension is mirroring and relying on the third dimension because the beings in the third dimension are still able to make individual choices. And this is how we can actually push against the negative forces in the universe. Because in the third dimension, we are still seeing ourselves as individuals. Therefore, we have individual choices. So these beings in the sixth dimension are relying on the third dimension to make decisions. So as I'm watching that, I'm like, that's literally the plot of the Neverending Story. A little boy named Bastian, which originates from the Italian word to build, becomes immersed in the book The Neverending Story, which is about a world called Fantasia. But now that I'm thinking of it, many of the beings that were shown in this world are actually representing different levels of consciousness. Like, for example, we talk about the first level of consciousness being an elemental or mineral and rock level. We have other beings that are plant beings or animal beings. And there's gnomes and fairies. And when Bastian first starts entering Fantasia through the book, we have 4 beings that come from north, south, east, and west, and they each represent a different element or level 1 consciousness. And that's when we're introduced to the villain, the Nothing. And the Nothing is a force that is consuming everything. And this is where a young warrior, Atreyu, goes out into Fantasia to save the Empress and all of Fantasia from the Nothing. But actually, from a lot of different sources, when we hear about the sixth dimension, we hear that the sixth dimension is above levels of individual consciousness. So therefore, it is nothing and everything that exists all at the same time. So this nothing is consuming Fantasia. But by the end of this film, when the Nothing has consumed every single thing except for the Empress, the only thing that could save Fantasia is a boy, a human in the third dimension. And all he needs to do is make a choice and give the Empress a name. Because the sixth dimension, the nothingness, relies on the third dimension, the individual choices. So then after Bastian makes a choice, the Empress gives him a grain of sand that is composed completely of light. She tells him that basically with that source of light, he can create Fantasia all over again and all the worlds everywhere. So when Bastian makes a choice in the third dimension, it ripples out and saves the other dimensions from nothingness. So I was also lucky enough to be able to interview Tim last week and ask his favorite book recommendations, and I got to ask if he ever read The Neverending Story. You can go over to my Instagram or YouTube and take a look at that. And fun fact, the writer of the original Neverending Story book is German, and it is also a German film. But if you look into this author, he was actually a follower of anthroposophy. And when you look more into these beliefs, it makes sense that he was describing this stuff actually. Because he talks about the stages of human evolution from clairvoyance to becoming intellectual, and how moving through these different levels of consciousness happens through the process of reincarnation of the human spirit, passing through different stages of existence, incarnating into an earthly body. Another big aspect of these beliefs is about duality, how these polarizing forces have such an impact on the evolution of humans and their spirit. And that might be one of the reasons why the author absolutely hated how the film came out, because he did feel that nothing is lost, everything is transformed, and that even through the darkness, there was always some type of positive outcome. And just to address our collective childhood trauma of Artex falling into this swamp of sadness and dying, this memorable and traumatic scene is actually very important because it talks about sadness and depression preventing the boy from completing his true mission on this planet. Because in a way, Atreyu is kind of a multidimensional version of Bastian. Okay, one fun fact before we go. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg both helped the director with this film. In this scene, you can see E.T., Chewbacca, Yoda, and for some reason, Gumby. So if you haven't seen this movie in a while, and neither have I, give it a watch and let me know in the comments any other cool things that you see pop up connected to dimensions.